Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is your Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller, and tonight is March 8th, Wednesday night, 2017. As always, you can get a hold of us at 1-800-472-0391. That'll get you to our local forecast office, and we can give you any updates you need. As far as our website, weather.gov/Alaska, that will be for Juneau, Fairbanks, and Anchorage offices. And then if you need to get in touch with the TV weather desk specifically, you can email us nws.ar.tv.weather@noaa.gov. So taking a look at our headlines tonight, not a lot of change in this pattern. This pattern's been fairly persistent the last, almost a week now, and it's not going to change a whole lot. But the few areas that will continue to be highlighted will be the snow over southeast Alaska, and we'll take a look at a winter storm warning that's still in effect for you folks down near Ketchikan. Blizzard warnings are going to be up near the Chukchi coast and the Arctic coastline there, so we'll take a look at that as well. And some south central gap winds will continue to blow. The north to south oriented gaps will continue to see winds blowing through there at least through tonight into early tomorrow morning. And then subtle changes are going to make a big difference, so we'll see a little bit of reorientation of this pattern, and we'll start to notice a marked difference in some of these places. It'll just be in a few localized areas, but we'll get into that here as we go through our forecast. So for our winter storm warning, we do have that down near Ketchikan in the southern inner channels, and that is in effect until 6 p.m. tonight. Several inches of snow have already fallen. A little bit more is expected for the next few minutes here, and that warning should be winding down here within the hour. As we look up towards the Arctic coastline, we do have that blizzard warning in effect, basically from Cape Lisburne up through Point Lay, so right there through Wainwright and Point Hope, and that is going to be in effect until 9 a.m. on Friday, and expect blizzard conditions with visibilities down to a quarter mile, so be careful if you're traveling in this area. As far as the Arctic coastline here, we do have a winter weather advisory, mainly for blowing snow, south to southwest winds up near 30 miles an hour, and that is going to be in effect from midnight tonight until noon on Friday. So be aware of the hazardous conditions associated with the systems moving through the Arctic coast. So as we look at our map here, you can see not a whole lot in the way of cloud cover. This is actually all just cold temperatures showing up on the infrared satellite as we're accustomed to. But we do see those few areas of lower pressure in the form of some high clouds moving through the northwest coast there, and that is what's creating those hazardous conditions up there. Down towards south central, you can see clear skies have been the rule. And then as we look at southeast, we can put this into motion one more time. As we look towards southeast, there's our spin in the atmosphere, our area of low pressure spinning counterclockwise. This has really been caused by the cold air coming off the state out over the warmer Gulf waters, and then that causes a little bit of cyclonic vorticity, we call it, or that counterclockwise spin. And so with that, that's why we've had the heavier snow down near Ketchikan and the southern inner channels, and then just some snow showers off over the Gulf of Alaska. Now looking further to the west, here is our frontal boundary that is really riding up the backside of the main area of high pressure. So the clockwise rotation around the area of high pressure. This is our frontal boundary out here, continuing to bring a plume of subtropical moisture over into eastern Russia, so not really a lot of impact for the mainland of Alaska, but that is where the bulk of the precipitation and the strength of the storms have been way out over there. So pretty quiet weather for the most part, just those hazardous conditions up along the Arctic coast, and then the offshore, cool offshore air flowing from the interior portion of the state out over the open waters. So taking a look at that in form of our surface map, you can see there that is the area of the stationary boundary, basically running from the western Aleutians towards the Bering Sea, and with that just plenty of rain moving up through areas like Shimia and maybe eventually working their way towards the towards the Adak and AKwx area later on. But really you're not seeing much in the way of snow until you get all the way up into the Chukchi Sea, and with that the cold air has really been confined well far to the north because of the southerly flow around this high pressure. There is our area of high pressure in control at 1,045 millibars, still very strong and really dominating the pattern. Here along the Gulf Coast, that's where we have those stronger offshore winds, and that's courtesy of these tight isobars here. So again, we have this tight packing in the pressure fields, these isobars representing pressure. So the strong offshore winds blowing across those, especially in places like Thompson Pass, Valdez, Seward, seeing some gusty winds, and into the Prince William Sound. As we look towards southeast Alaska, that's where we have some snow showers out over the Gulf, but really the heavier snow just starting to wind down towards Ketchikan and those areas. It'll be fairly steady, at least for the next little bit here, and then we'll start to see things calm down. We do have some gusty winds following in behind that as well, though. This basically represents the difference between the air masses over the Gulf, where it's warmer and moister, and the cold, dry air up over the interior continental regions of Canada. And then out over the Arctic coast, that's where we do have that next area of snow that's going to move in later tonight. Already seeing the blizzard conditions with the blowing snow up along the coastline, but we do expect some falling snow to start to move in as we go through the overnight hours. So kind of a unique setup as we see some warmer air come all the way around this area of high pressure and start to actually move some warmer temperatures from the southwest up into the Arctic coastline. And we're actually going to see a slow warming trend for much of the state as this area of high pressure does slide off to the east. So into tonight now, you can see that blowing snow will continue, and that will be our primary hazard through the overnight hours. Our front out over the Bering Sea continues to bring moisture north out to the western side of this ridge axis, and just some mixed rain and snow showers really is all we expect for the central Aleutians down near AKwx and Adak. Towards south central Alaska, continued offshore flow from much of the areas, keeping things dry and relatively cold. It has been a gusty day through south central as well, from Talkeetna all the way through the Cook Inlet. And out over the open waters, that's where we see those snow showers as that cold air makes its way out over the warmer waters. And then the snow showers starting to wind down a little bit, but still keeping gusty winds in over the southeastern portion of the state. Possibility some fog over the Eagle and Chicken areas, but it'll just be patchy in nature. As we move into Thursday now, high pressure continues to slide just a little bit further to the east, and that's really going to be the critical thing here, is as that high pressure slides east, should allow some of that energy to shift off to the east as well, and thus those lines of pressure that we saw earlier packed tighter are now starting to open up just a little bit. So we should see winds start to die down a little bit, and temperatures will actually be on the rise as we move into some warmer air at about 5,000 feet, and that starts to mix down towards the surface. Still going to have our blowing snow and snow concerns all the way through Thursday, courtesy of these few shortwave troughs. And then out over the Bering Sea, pretty quiet as far as winds and waves until you get along this frontal boundary. We do see some rain, probably a little bit stronger winds there from the south, and some rain and snow mixing up as you get towards the Gulf of Anadyr. Out over southeast Alaska, see things drying out quite a bit with just a little bit of offshore flow continuing to keep things gusty there, but mainly just showers out over the open waters. And then on into Friday, we'll continue to see the pattern change very slowly. Again, probably slightly warmer and the potential for some fog to develop. Also some high clouds spilling in across places that haven't seen clouds for 7 days or so. We'll still see our blowing snow up along the coastline, courtesy of that shortwave, and then high pressure redeveloping out over the west portion of the state, and that's going to once again dry things, or keep things dry for those areas. Weak frontal system trying to clip into the western Aleutians, but not going to be a big impact to our weather. And then out over southeast Alaska on Friday, again, starting to see those lines of pressure open up a little bit. Wind should start to come down, and we should see dry conditions continuing to be the case, with maybe the exception of a few snow showers down near Dixon Entrance. So what do we have for temperatures this afternoon at 4 o'clock? Well, generally across the state, pretty consistent to what they were yesterday, and maybe even a little bit warmer, where some of those winds have been blowing, actually helping to create some friction at the surface and bump temperatures up a little bit, even though the wind chills have been down. And as you can see here along southeast Alaska, pretty marked difference all the way from the low to upper teens to low 20s, and then becoming all the way into the mid to upper 30s as you get down towards Metlakatla. So quite a big difference there. And then over south central Alaska, mainly in the mid 20s. Again, wind chills making it feel a little bit bit colder. We do have a wind chill advisory in effect until Friday as well for White Pass area for southeast Alaska. Out over the central portion of the state, mainly got into the single digits today, some places just above 10 degrees, and then along the Arctic coast, obviously quite a bit colder, -10 to -15 out there. Out over the western portion of the state and out towards the Alaska Peninsula, generally conditions in the mid-20s, becoming 30s out over the Alaska Peninsula. Interesting to see some of that cold air mixing in near Nelson Lagoon. They got up to 26 today was all, but then Cold Bay was all the way up to 36 at 4 p.m. So pretty strong cold air coming off the mainland. Here we go for tonight's low temperatures, generally in the teens for southeast Alaska. We're going to see anywhere between -25 to -35 over the interior portion of the state. South Central will be in the single digits and maybe even slightly below over the Susitna Valley. And for southwest Alaska, single digits to single digits below zero. Up over the Arctic coast, anywhere from -10 to -20 below. And again, those colder temperatures helping to create some of that blowing and drifting snow. Tomorrow's high temperatures generally climbing into the 20s for southeast Alaska, maybe some temperatures even touching 30. For South Central, pretty similar to today with mid to lower 20s. Out over the eastern portion of the interior, generally in the single digits to a few spots below zero. Along the Arctic coast, 0 to 10 degrees above zero. And for southwest Alaska, conditions will generally be in the teens and maybe even some low 20s near the southwest coast of the Bristol Bay. Flying weather for tomorrow morning. Our primary areas of concern will be along the frontal boundary there with IFR conditions expected if you're going way out to the west. Otherwise, basically from Gamble all the way up through the northwest portion of the state and Point Lay, that's where we have those blizzard conditions and expect IFR visibilities there. And a few spots of MVFR conditions out over the open waters where those snow showers are going. As we look into the afternoon time frame, those snow showers will diminish, helping to reduce the MVFR conditions out over the Gulf. And our continued IFR conditions along the Arctic coast with that moisture moving from west to east up there, helping to create those lower ceilings and visibilities, and then continuing to keep the MVFR and IFR conditions out over the Bering with that frontal system. So as far as our passes, you're going to notice a trend here as we go through. You'll see a lot of green except for Lake Clark and Merrill. Excuse me, that's actually incorrect. Those are also visual flight rules. The one and only spot that is not visual flight rules throughout all the passes is going to be Chilkoot and White, who could see some lower visibility due to some snow showers in the morning, but they should be improving through the day. So VFR at all the passes to Needham and Tasta, Portage, we're going to see visual flight rules. Here's where we might have some marginal flight rules in the morning becoming visual in the afternoon. Looking at our freezing levels, no surprise there. You can see the pattern in place. Cold air moving offshore, keeping the surface line well to the south of the mainland. And there's our warm air riding up the backside of that ridge all the way up to 4,000 foot freezing levels. What does that mean for our icing? Well, associated with that system up to the north, we have a few areas of light to isolated moderate above 3,000. Above 4,000 along our frontal boundary. And then out over the southeastern portion of the state, dissipating areas above 1 and 2,000 with showers associated, bringing some icing to those areas. Taking a look at our jet stream now, you can see the pattern in place, 125 knots riding up the west side of the ridge and down through, making those outflow winds, upper level supported 100 knots. And that is really what's keeping things entrenched. The stronger storm track, 165 knots down over the southern portion of our area and out into the continental United States. Looking at the 9,000 foot winds, there you can see similar pattern rotating around this area of high pressure. The stronger winds along that frontal boundary from south to north at about 50 knots. Pretty quiet all over much of the interior except until you get near the Brooks Range where we have a stronger westerly flow, and then moving offshore through places through the southeast and south central coastlines at about 30 knots. For 3,000 foot winds, similar conditions in the areas, similar directions, just a little bit lower speeds, 25 knots offshore winds. And then along our frontal boundary, southerly winds at about 45 knots. And along the Brooks Range, coming across at about 40 knots, becoming 25 knots as you get towards northwestern portion of Canada. So what does that mean for our turbulence? Well, below 6,000 feet, we'll be tapering off through the day as those winds start to slacken. Similar conditions with that northeasterly flow going offshore. We do have some channeled possibility for some light to isolated moderate below 6,000. And then just our area of below 4,000 foot light to isolated moderate turbulence associated with that stronger winds along the Arctic coast. Stay tuned. We'll be back with your marine forecast.
This is one of them beautiful days. Most times you hear these seagulls all the time, you know. But there was none that day.
It was spooky quiet.
I looked down and there was a box of 22 shells, and I said, wow. I reached down and picked those up, and I said, man, this is going to be my lucky day.
We were just about ready to make the set when we felt this tapping vibration in the bottom of the skiff.
You know, if you heard this rolling rumble.
We didn't know what it was, because it was severe.
And it started rolling. And it was just like that first.
You got to remember, this is during the Cold War. My immediate thoughts were they nuked Anchorage.
It was just awesome. All hell broke loose, and the ground started rocking and rolling. And my little buddy told me, "Earthquake, run." So we started running.
The earth was opening up right across the street, right in front of me, and black water was shooting up in the air about, I would say, 15 to 30 feet.
The tops of the phone poles snapping off.
The trees were whipping back and forth.
And it just kept right on shaking. And as it got further along, it was worse.
As we stood there on the corner, the first of the Standard oil tanks began to explode.
Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of gallons of fuel that were burning.
And it burned and burned and burned. It was light as day that night, except for the black soot that was falling.
March 27, 1964. Alaska had experienced the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in North America. The magnitude 9.2 quake left Anchorage and other communities devastated. And although there would be aftershocks for weeks, for most of Alaska, the worst was over. But for many coastal communities, the horror was only beginning. The mega-scale earthquake sent multiple killer tsunamis onto Alaska's shores. Most fatalities occurred in Seward, Valdez, and Kodiak.
The channel completely emptied out. You could actually see the bottom of the channel.
And we should have realized, I guess, that the water was going to come in rapidly, but we were fairly ignorant of tsunamis.
No cresting wave. It was just this huge surge that came up and took what boats were left in the harbor and basically rolled them around town.
So it come way up in and washed all of the town out down below, just everything.
Turned and started running, and it happened about as fast as I just told you.
When the water went back out, it went down through the channel, just whoosh.
It may have been like 20 or 30 knots of current going through that channel. It's incredible.
Of man in a boat with no oars or nothing. He was just sitting there, probably just paralyzed, you know. And he was going round and round.
Over 30 people died on Kodiak Island. It's relatively sparsely populated. It happened at a time of day when most people were away from the harbor and the businesses downtown. They were at home already. And if it had happened earlier, the loss of life would have been a lot higher.
Kodiak's devastation was caused by the main tsunami wave that was triggered out in the Gulf of Alaska. But Seward experienced a phenomenon called local tsunamis, which were generated by landslides in nearby Resurrection Bay. These waves were far more dangerous than the main tsunami, which struck later. Bob Eads and his brother were south of town on Lowell Point when the first locally generated wave hit.
The first wave came in way over in that direction. That's when the ocean was boiling with them big boils there, and it went clear over 4th of July at treetop level over there and clear around to the head of the bay, clear out to the airport, and clear into the small boat harbor, and then headed toward Mount Marathon. and took the small boat harbor out.
Bob and his brother jumped into their pickup truck and tried to escape.
I couldn't outrun it, and it overtook us, and we was under about 15 feet of water. That covers up, and it got awful dark, blacker than the inside of a goat, you know. We thought, well, it's just about the end. And then we seen the daylight come. The water went down and back out.
The brothers miraculously survived, but what no one knew was that the main tsunami from the Gulf was bearing down on Seward.
The water just completely emptied right out of the bay. You couldn't see anything.
Resurrection Bay. It's approximately 900 feet deep, and what just startled me looking out there was no water, absolutely no water as far as you can see. The bay's 18 miles deep and 2 to 3 miles wide, and I could see no water at all. And I commented to my dad about it, and that should have been our warning sign to turn around and get out of there, but we didn't.
Coming back into the bay was this big swell. I mean, great big swell, and it wasn't a round one like it went out. It was combing at the top.
And somebody screaming, "Get out, get out. Tsunami coming, tidal wave coming. Get out, go to high ground."
There was this barge, and it had a big crane right at the back of it. It was just like a skier, and he was just skiing right going out of town with this big swell. And as I went around the corner and started up the hill, well, the box cars and the railroad tracks or railroad cars hit me right in the back of the wrecker, and I would say probably pushed me up the hill about 20 or 30 feet.
By then, Doug McRae and his family had scrambled onto the roof of their house.
We took a wild ride. It was like a surf ride. There was power lines that we were worried about getting scraped off the roof. Those tree limbs, and we were spinning and bouncing off trees. And this one, I'm just guessing maybe 10 minutes. And we got wedged in amongst some big trees, big cottonwood trees.
Power had gone off, the sewers were gone, the water was gone. There was absolutely nothing left in the way of utilities.
All the docks had completely disappeared. There's just a few stumps sticking up there. It's really a mess. And basically for us, Seward was gone because our livelihood was gone, our employment was gone, the canneries were gone.
And finally I turned to my mother and said to her, "Well, Mom, there goes your All-America City." And we laughed.
And welcome back for your marine forecast. Let's take a look at our sea ice. Down here towards Kuskokwim and Bristol Bay, we are going to see continued slow growth with those offshore winds helping to push it down to the southwest. However, along the main ice pack here and on the western periphery, not going to see much progress to the west with that warm air pushing up courtesy of that front. And then taking a look towards south central, mainly increase in concentration and depth of the ice. Don't expect a whole lot of expanse horizontally, but just mainly increase in the thickness of the ice. As we look towards the marine forecast for southeast Alaska on Thursday, we do expect pretty strong northerly winds, 45 knots towards Lynn Canal, seas at 12 feet, and some freezing spray. Do have some gusts to 60 knots as well, so be advised if you're planning on taking any marine travel in that area that it could be quite a rough trip. Northerly winds 30 and 25 towards the southern portions of the inner passageways and 5 and 10-foot seas there. Out over the open waters, 20 to 30 knots out of the north and east, and with that some higher gusts as well coming out through the bays and passes. Seas generally between 6 and 8 feet. Same conditions on Friday for much of the outer waters. Higher gusts still, north to northeast winds and 20 to 30 knots. Seas generally between 6 and 8 feet, and some freezing spray up towards Yakutat. Calming down a little bit towards the inner passageways, 20 to 35 knots. Stronger winds up to the north, and seas generally all the way up to 12 feet here and only 4 feet down towards the Dixon entrance. Some freezing spray still up near Lynn Canal. A little bit better conditions towards south central Alaska. Still have some higher gusts through the Copper River Delta at about 45 knots and some gusts in the Prince William Sound, but generally north to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots and seas on the order of about 3 to 8 feet on Thursday. And we'll see those gusts diminish as the pattern does shift just a little bit, generally a little bit more confused directions of winds with some variable to 10 knots in there, but otherwise northerly to northwesterly 10 to 20 knots, seas about 2 to 4 feet. For the Alaska Peninsula, you can see north to northeast winds 15 to 25 knots and seas generally between 5 and 6 feet. And then on Friday, variable or northerly winds 10 knots north of the peninsula and 6-foot seas with northeast 20 knots south of the peninsula. For Thursday out over the Aleutians, you expect generally southeast or easterly winds for the central and eastern Aleutians, 15 to 25 knots, 5 to 11-foot seas, and then southeast becoming northerly winds out towards the western Aleutians as you wrap around that front, 12 to 14-foot seas and 20 to 30 knots on wind speeds. A little bit more consistent east to southeast flow throughout the chain on Friday, 15 to 30 knots and seas between 5 and 10 feet. Towards the west coast, we have northeast winds becoming southeast and southerly winds up along the ice pack there, and generally 10 to 30 knots with seas building the farther away from the ice pack you are up to 13 feet. And then on Friday, lighter winds, generally variable about 10 knots unless you're out a little bit farther to the north and west where we have southerly winds 20 knots and seas all the way up to 5 to 11 feet. Along the Arctic coast, generally expect southerly winds about 30 to 35 knots there near Cape Lisburne, becoming southwest 25 to 30 knots and all ice covered up there. And then on Friday, expect a little bit calmer wind speeds southerly and southwesterly, 15 to 30 knots generally across the area. So recapping tonight's weather, we do have our blizzard warning for the Point Lay to Cape Lisburne areas, and that'll be in effect all the way until Friday morning. And we do have some blowing snow near Barrow. Our winter weather warning will die off very soon near the Ketchikan area, and then our wind chill advisory will remain in effect till Friday morning for White Pass. Seeing conditions remain cold and dry over the mainland on Thursday, and continued conditions on Friday. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.